NASA Science. That's Science Mission Directorate's website for education and public outreach. This is Daniel Greenfeld. He is one of our developers on the team, and we're here to talk about everything we went through to make the NASA Science site what it is today. The original site was actually deployed in the late 90s, and at the time it won awards. I mean, I think it was around 1999. Won awards for design, for content. However, over time, the site ended up degrading. It didn't age very well. As you can see, it does look very 90s. It had actually given away to many sub-sites. A customer would come along and say, I want a site of my own, and I don't want it to look like that. So as you click through the site, all of a sudden, everything would change. It was done in HTML, a little bit of inline CSS, and the occasional Perl script, and one or two Cold Fusion applications that were very rarely used. So we decided it was time for a new site, and our customer came to us and asked us, can you please make something for us? They assumed we were going to go and make some comps in Photoshop and export them again, and that it would magically be a beautiful new site. We decided to sell them on a CMS. Now, one of the problems with how do you sell a CMS to people that are used to pure HTML? We emphasized what they gained, sharing of content, the reuse of content, that you can have more complex interactions between the data and the interface. So, for instance, we have an image of the day field, we have news feeds, we have filters for missions. And it's easier to change the layout and the design and the content on the fly, or at least more on the fly, instead of having to go to each page and change them one by one and hope you got all of them. Now, they did have some good points because they were losing a few things. For instance, it was instant to them. They would talk to a designer, the designer would change it in Photoshop and re-upload it. It was instant. When you have a development team, you can't always, if it's a content, yeah, you can change that really quickly. If they want to change to a template, they have to wait for us to go through our design process, through our design and develop, and that's about a 5-week process, so they have a 12-week wait sometimes to get something they asked for. And before, they had a small team. They had 1 or 2 designers that they just had on their speed dial, and they would call them up and they would get it done, and the designer would go maybe talk to their boss, so they really didn't have that many people. Our team at the moment is 4 developers, probably 2 CSS design guys. We have a PM, we have 2 leads. It expanded. It's an enormous team compared to what they had before, which was a couple of designers that did it in their off time. We had to explore a couple of different options. We're actually a very full house. We have a .NET group, we have a Cold Fusion group, we have a Java group, and this was a really cool project. Most of the stuff we did before was behind the scenes, and all of a sudden we could do something that everyone would see. They would get huge publicity, so everybody wanted in. So we had to explore some various options. Do you want to talk about the options?
Sure.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Daniel Greenfeld, as she said. So the first option, of course, is HTML, because we get, like she said, really fast deployment. The problem was that the site wasn't just a few pages with some different designs. No, there was hundreds, maybe thousands of different HTML pages, and the science had gone stale on a lot of them. Things changed. Global warming. Well, sorry, I'm not supposed to talk about that. Okay, good. I'm sorry. Climate change. Climate change was an issue. So also each article, when you do it this way, because you're changing HTML, you have to vet it against not just a scientist or a content editor, but also you have to have the graphic designer do the work, make sure that the images are good. So in theory, it was faster to do it this way, but to keep the content updated, it was just going to take forever. So. And also, you can't really effectively search HTML. Yeah, there is Google search, but if you don't have the right tags set up, if you wanna block something, if you wanna have something take higher prominence, you can't really do that in plain HTML.
Also, as a government entity, we're often blocked from using things like Google. Sometimes we can use it. Sometimes they're like, no, it has to be in-house or purchased.
Right. Our Cold Fusion guys wanted to write a CMS from scratch. I personally have put in too much time fixing applications that would be better served by either an open source product like Plone or, God forbid, Joomla or Drupal, or bulletin boards. I mean, I've done this too many times, so I was opposed to this. The other thing is that one of the things I suggested when they mentioned this, even though I really wanted Plone, is I said, why don't you use Far Cry? Because that's an open source Cold Fusion CMS. The problem is a lot of other open source content management systems, such as Far Cry, are not Section 508 compliant. And for us, that is a law. That is a mandate that we have to follow. If you violate 508 and you're trying to release, they will shut you down. We can't get past that. The other thing with Cold Fusion is it follows the CGI model, so the URLs are really crufty. So if you're trying to send to my mother, for example, if I want to send them to her, so she can send to my nieces something about earth science, and that's related to astrophysics, with our current site, we can send them a really nice URL instead of question mark ID equals a MD5 hash. The other thing is you can actually find some of the public-facing Cold Fusion sites, and they look like something built in 1995. They didn't have a good track record for implementing good design. So yeah, so Cold Fusion was an option. We also have a group of .NET people, and we've got some really talented people there. However, their bandwidth was full. They were way too busy. Thank God. The other thing that they raised is that we had some experience with .NET Nuke, and all I can say is just say no. If you're working on a project which they want to use a Microsoft solution, steer them towards SharePoint. Don't let them go to .NET Nuke if you're asked the question. SharePoint, the problem with SharePoint is scaling issues. It's not going to scale if you get hit with hard bandwidth. The .NET developers were telling us this. Lastly is the eTouch Java CMS that the NASA portal uses. And actually, this was asked on my blog, and I just answered it, finally. The NASA portal system, even though it launched before we did, we started first. It's difficult to explain why it took us a while, but let's just say we had a lot of other tasks running concurrently. They're also a different group. They have a different pool of money. Their goal is different. Their goal is to be the world's gateway into NASA. Our job is to be the world's gateway into science at NASA. So we kind of have a different viewpoint on things. However, we are starting to work with them, and if I have time, we might go into that, unless Katie says I can't. And then there's Plone. I can give you lots of reasons why. I can spend hours explaining it, but you wouldn't be here. So if you needed to have those reasons explained. So we ended up with Plone. I'll let Katie take over.
One of the first things we did, we actually had a bunch of designers that came from a print shop. And if anybody's ever had to deal with designers who are from a print shop, it's an interesting exercise to get them to do web design correctly. They loved Photoshop. We had to kill Photoshop. You know, we had to tell them, you're not exporting templates from this. It's not going to work. You need to learn CSS. You need to learn everything, you know, about web design. We basically turned them into developers. They weren't happy about this at first, but now they feel very empowered. We've given them the power to put things where they want them, because most designers are control freaks, and they want everything exactly where they need it to be. We taught them TAL. Everyone had a desktop instance that they could program onto. We taught them the standards of Plone, standard tags, standard, you know, what you use, you know, where you put your CSS, you know, how you order it. We also taught them to use SVN, which was the biggest boon. Took a while, but when they figured out that they could, you know, just hit a button and it would update on everybody's computer and everybody was working in the same kind of pool of code, it made them really excited. Because now everybody was updated all at once, and they could share, and they weren't writing over each other. We converted them, finally. The biggest thing, the biggest boon, we got a guru. He was a complete accident. I was walking by his desk. He had a figurine on his desk of a game I play. We started talking. He was a new guy. He's like, yeah, I know CSS, and started burbling to me about CSS. And I ran back to my boss and said, get him, get him. I don't care who has him. We need him on our project. And, you know, you've got to treat your gurus nicely. We got him. We made sure we got him the hours. We got him the tools he needed. I ended up, at one point, I was ready to give up my tools that I had just because he couldn't get the licenses. And I was like, just get him whatever he needs, because he ended up helping us. The site would not have been deployed without him, and he taught everyone else just by being there. So, Bill Keeter, we thank you very much. One of the things we were also doing concurrently while we were training the designers, we were learning the science. We're geeks, but we're not science geeks. We're mostly programming geeks. So we had to actually think about, you know, what does our customer do and what's the science behind it? Does anybody know what SMD does?
Science Mission Directorate.
Can anybody name something they do? They some of the things they do: Hubble, Mars rovers, Phoenix, Cassini, Messenger, any unmanned space flight that happens, anything that goes in the sun, goes in the atmosphere and takes great pictures, that's generally us. Good rule of thumb. They did so much, and we had to learn about that because we had to learn how to translate all of those wonderful things into a website. We also started to think of old data in new ways. One of the traditional ways when you're talking about the planets is you talk about the solar system. And you go, okay, well, first you start with the sun, and then you go to Mercury. And one of the things we found is that that's really boring. Everybody tunes it out. Nobody listens anymore. They don't care about how big, you know, Mercury is. They read it once in the second grade, and they're done with it. We started actually going back and thinking about other ways we could present it. We actually present the information in the terms of missions. What are we doing? What do we have in the sky? What do we have planned? What missions are going to the moon? What missions are going to Mercury? That makes it more, it makes it alive. It's not just some crufty old information that somebody had, you know, 30 years ago in an old textbook. It's new, it's alive, and it has new information coming in all the time. One of the great things about having a big project is you either have you start off and nobody has any idea what to do, or everybody has tons of ideas. This is only a third of the comps we had and the ideas. We actually had a ton more. These were all the different ideas. We kind of went out and tried to figure out what's attractive, what works, what do people respond to. To do that, we did usability training, usability work. We actually got in people just from out, you know, in the general public, from within NASA, from within educational spheres, scientific spheres, and had them look at, you know, our websites, had them do card sorts and design comparisons. What do you like better? What are your impressions of this? Can you navigate through the site, or are you always running to search to try to figure out where to find information about the moon? We did questionnaires. You know, what do you think about when you think of the sun? You know, what do you think about when you think of planetary? You know, what are some things that interest you about NASA? We also have independent audits that actually are still going on. We have a usability expert that's part of our team that goes through and every once in a while goes back to the site, runs through it, and says, yeah, you know those decisions you guys have been making over a few months, there's some that have gone awry. And she finds places in navigation where it no longer seemed like a really good idea at the time. Or it was a developer made a call. You know, no offense to you guys, but a developer made a quick call. We went through, okay, it looks fine, just put it up there. And the usability person catches things like that.
Do you use your analytics data to help you tune the usability as well?
Yes. We actually look at what people are searching for and where they're getting it. We look at log files when we get errors, when people are landing in weird places that they shouldn't be landing for that kind of information.
Do you do like path and goal analysis?
We don't really do path and goal analysis. That's actually kind of tricky because we're a government entity, and that's very Big Brother.
Oh, right. Okay.
So we can do search. We can do that kind of stuff.
Did you have to do any rationalization of content at all that was old?
Yes, we had to go over a lot.
Because that was our migrate. Like, we went from a huge static site, and we actually had to kill stuff.
Yeah, we had to go through, and there were subsites that, you know, there was somebody's pride and joy 4 years ago, and It was no longer relevant. We had to get rid of it. And you had to deal a lot with customers because they were still around. They hadn't retired yet, and we were not going to wait for it. So we had to talk to them and prep them and sometimes say, hey, if you're interested, we'll give you another sub-site if you give us money. So there's a lot of that, and there's a lot of, dealing. We spent a lot of time with the customer and all the customers in SMD, making them all happy. Do you want to talk about site architecture?
Yes. This is almost the site architecture. It is showing how containers contain other objects. It is not showing the relations, the associations. The software I wrote to do this doesn't do that yet. But as you can see, there's a lot to this. I mean, I've been told, oh, it's not that complex, but you're missing a lot of the context there. We're actually working to simplify the architecture. One of the things that we did while capturing this is whenever you capture new architecture, you make mistakes. Fortunately, Plone is liberal enough to let us go back and make corrections. And we have a nice enough customer who says, by all means, make the internal side of things better. If it helps the content editors, if it means that we can get data up faster, by all means do that. The way we generated this, originally the site architecture was built using Argo UML, exported via ArchGen XML, and that crashed hard and it wasn't saved. So I wrote a tool called Umlyzer, which goes into ZOAP databases and introspects and uses a variety of different ways to display data. This one is done using Graphiz. I'm trying to release this as an open source product, but NASA's being slow. I'll talk about that at the end. So, Katie.
I'm very sorry. There we go. And here we have the site today. It's actually still growing. We have 6-week development and deployment cycles, so we constantly are working on it. New sections are actually being added over the next year or so and beyond. We have kids, we have a technology section, teens, and it also evolves as NASA's missions evolve. So for instance, Mercury, we had a big thing with Messenger did a flyby of Mercury, and they wanted to get RSS feed on that page. And we didn't have a portlet for that because this is actually Plone 2.5. We're upgrading it to 3, but at the moment we're we can't do that at the moment, so we're writing a portlet so people can add RSS feeds when they need them. And that as, missions all of a sudden say, oh, well, now we want a photo gallery at the bottom of ours. Okay, we're evolving to meet their standards and meet their needs. And it's also changing as, NASA's technical community is coming together. They're actually getting a standard on RSS, throughout, figuring out which standard we're going to adopt throughout NASA to share information. So we don't have people writing custom RSS feeds. If you've ever had to deal with a custom RSS feed, you feel our pain when we've had them break on us and break our site. And we're also working with eTouch, that they're going to start hosting our site in their server farm. So there's a lot of, talk between communities and contracts and making this site grow even larger. And that is our URL.
How large is it now in terms of content and traffic?
We're pushing up about 2 gigs of data. I don't have the hard numbers on, that's how much.
We can do the size of DataFS, couldn't we?
Yeah, I could. I don't have the recent copy handy.
Yeah.
Traffic-wise, I don't recall what the numbers. We have been slashed out. We have been dug. We haven't had any problems. Here is some of the technical details. I could go into that. The real experts are Chris Shenton and Reed O'Brien. If you happen to stumble into them, they're the ones who really did the setup and configuration. Some things have worked better than others. But the site is growing, so we'll see. Go ahead.
Okay. Do you want to talk about?
I guess we're going to go over lessons learned during this effort. And the first one is requirements go 2 ways. One of the things is often as developers, when we get a bad requirement, we yell and fuss. And by all means, getting great requirements is wonderful. But one of the things I had to learn was when you get a requirement that isn't clear, it's not just a matter of asking nicely. Take a requirement that you understand well and rewrite it into a nice, readable format, how you like it, and then tell people, hey, isn't this a good idea? So as a developer, this is really, really critical, because if you just say, you need to rewrite this isn't clear, they'll add more text. The requirement will get bigger and more obtuse. Let's see, vetting. Make sure you understand the capabilities of your group. The whole thing with graphic designers not knowing CSS because they come from print media. They might have taken the CSS class. They might know how to make bold things, but can they do a whole layout and stuff? If they don't, then train them. And we'll get into training in a little bit.
I was actually one of the people when we started. They said, hey, you know some CSS? Congrats, you're the head of the CSS group. I had touched CSS 5 years ago for a few months.
Yeah.
And so yes, very much vet what people can actually do, not just what's on their resume.
Right. Also coming into the project, I'd been doing Python for a while. I'd had several Python projects under my belt. Some had come to great success. I'd toyed with Plone. And so I made it clear, fortunately, I was smart enough to make it clear to my bosses that I was getting up to speed on Plone. My tasks, when I did them, were going to take a while until I got up to speed. And with Plone as is currently, it takes a while. So the corollary to vetting is training is worth the investment. If there are any developers in the room, I don't know. But if you're trying to justify training, tell them that NASA said it's worth the investment. Joel Burton, who's here in the room, is a great teacher. Nate had a class last year that I went to that got me really up to speed on ZOAP 3 concepts. Any training you can get, never turn it down. As managers, certainly flying me to Italy to take a few days of class was probably a bit expensive, but at least here in the US, there's various symposiums and groups. If it's across the country and you can find a cheap place for them to stay, or if you can bring in Joel or one of the other trainers in locally, do that. It really helps. Also conferences, and I'll go into that in a little bit. Use the community. I know you hear this lots and lots, but since I like to think of myself as Joe Developer, the way I've learned about using the community is anytime you try to figure out something and it's a little bit of a challenge, check the community, because odds are, because the Plone community is filled with people who like to challenge hard problems, odds are someone's done it before you and they've done it better, and they've done it according to some standard or specification you don't know about. And you'll get dinged on later if you don't do it that way. Yeah, John's laughing. Have you run into this?
You attribute an impressive degree of omniscience.
Find the masters. Try not to stalk them, but if you have to, stalk them. Make friends with them, show appreciation, buy them stuff. Don't bug them constantly, but a good master isn't just someone who knows all the answers, or there's someone who can explain them back to you or infer from you, because you're not sure what the problem is, what you're saying. If someone says, well, if you're in a verbal discussion, they say, well, you need to think about how you're going to ask me that question. Find a different master. Find maybe someone who's not so technically competent, but who understands the human species better. With that in mind, I'm going to bring one guy up, his name, Alexander Leamy. This is related to Find the Masters, Investigate the Third Products. Alexander, or Leamy, or whatever he's called, he said, investigate third-party products carefully. This bit me hard this summer. Fortunately, I have very forgiving coworkers. Yes, Plone has lots of third-party products. If you're investigating one, you're really thinking about integrating into your system, get onto Plone, talk to your whatever resident guru or master is, or someone you know, and say, what do you think of this?
And also, you'll notice one of the selling points we didn't have for Plone was all the add-on products. Add-on products are great. If you're trying to do a complex site like we were, we ended up using very few. And there's a reason for that. They don't like each other sometimes. Sometimes they have, very backwards programming practices. And sometimes really what you need to do is just rip it open, grab what you need, and get out. That's what we did for a lot of them, is that we found what we needed, we found the little bit we needed, grabbed it, and got out. because, you know, when you try to just install a bunch of products, it starts to get a little unwieldy.
Right. And, you know, I guess Alexander Lemis summoned it up best when he said one of the measures of a Plone developer's skin, he said this late at night, and people were saying he's supposed to be doing other stuff, but he took me into a private chat. But he said one of the measures of a Plone developer's skill is their ability to evaluate what others have done and to determine, is this worth bringing into your application? Martin Espelli and Philip von Biederhausen said this last year at the Plone conference. They had a presentation about it. Untested code is broken code. Have your developers, because I don't know how, can't tell how many developers are here, but have your developers write test. Even if they don't get 100% test coverage on stuff, Chris McDonough has written a great article on how to write good tests. I know some people hate doc tests. I love doc tests because I write them in restructured text. I convert them to HTML and I can show them to management and they can pass them up to the customer. But find a justification to writing tests and stick to it. And that has helped us a lot going forward. So we're going on to things in the works, things that we're planning to do. First thing is we're migrating to Plone 3, and that will happen sometime-ish.
February.
We'll see.
I'm the timekeeper.
Yeah.
So.
For us, if you look at our site, we've got on the left side, we've got portlets. There's a lot of custom hacking. We want to get rid of that. We want the power to control where portlets display, what they display. You know, in essence, what we're doing is really simple. The execution that we had to use under Plone 2.5 was hard. Because we're using Plone 2.5 and we got a weird Zope version, we can't really rely on generic setup. So Alex Clark and I have discovered that to our dismay. Alex Clark is one of our guys. He helps us. And we get access to everything else that comes for free with Plone 3. More syndication. We have problems with weird RSS feeds coming in. If you ever want to see what I mean, go to nasa.gov and check out their image of the day RSS, and it doesn't match any other RSS specification in the world. And so Feed Parser will parse it, but FeedFeeder can't support it. So I'm working with Martz and Reinhard von Ries. We're going to start working on FeedFeeder version 2. Wish me luck. I'm going to be doing most of the coding. And it's since I'm starting it outside of NASA, unfortunately, it's going to, well, actually, I guess it's fortunate for you guys. It's under GPL. And I'll get into that in a minute or two. For outgoing RSS feeds and other syndication, I was really excited by Vice. So we might put something together really on the interim until we move to Plone 3 and Vice gets mature. That was very exciting. I was jumping in my seat. This didn't fire. Embedding videos. Yeah, I guess we could use Plone for Artists, but nasa.gov is willing to host the video and provide the bandwidth. So we want to come up with an easy solution for our content editors to embed videos. I know there's a lot of exciting work coming down the pike, so we're really looking forward to what those guys have to offer. Oh, you can't even see the URL. I guess, well, that's good. This is my secret project, Umlizer. I had hoped when I started it internally. Everybody's excited. Our managers, our customers said, oh, it's a great idea. What it does is I explained earlier, it introspects a Plone database and it provides views using different formats. I had it working in a list view, a CSV view that you can import into Excel, graphics, so you get pretty graphics, Ubigraphs, so you could have rotating three-dimensional graphs. There's a JavaScript library that I found. The problem is I started it under, well, being paid. I talked about it being paid. So it'd have to be released as a NOSA. That's a NASA open source application, or NASA open source agreement license. It's not that restrictive, but the problem is trying to get NASA to say, yes, you can now release it. We can't get through the bureaucracy. So the link you can't see, maybe if I highlight.
There are very few people that actually do open source at NASA,
Oops.
and those that do are busy. They're very, very busy. And so my email doesn't get buried. How you can actually get to this is if you go to NASA Science, look for the Contact Us at the top of the page, or
and
click on
start
that.
requesting, will you please, can you release Umlizer? I heard about it and I want to see it.
You could you could import something from the Plone core, and then you'd be legally compelled.
I like my job. I'm sure it's a wonderful path. I like the fact that the customer is happy with me.
Yeah.
Um,
And we like working with lawyers just as much as you do. The
Yeah.
last thing I want to do is have a meeting with NASA lawyers.
Yeah. So please, they really, NASA's very, very aware of what, or wants the public to love them. So because we're always on the first cut for tax dollars, we have a very small budget for what we do. $11 billion a year for as much as we do goes not that far. There's a reason why China is going to beat us in the space race. Shh, not supposed to say that. But we don't have a big budget. So they're very aware of public perception, so your statements will make a difference.
Are you allowed to make, say, a screencast of UMLizer in action and show it?
I might be able to do that. That's an idea. I can see if I can get away with that. I'll
That would be a good way to whip up some
Yeah.
fanfare with specifics.
Yeah. As Katie mentioned, we're working with the NASA Portal team. That's eTouch. We're going to be doing infrastructure with them, sharing data. That's why Vice and FeedFeeder version 2 are going to be so useful. So if they give me broken RSS, I can accommodate them.
We also have a phone number we can call.
Oh,
And
yes.
say, your RSS is broken, by the way, and they're very nice people. So a lot of times they'll go, oh, gosh, sorry about that, and they'll fix it.
Yeah.
So
So NASA Science Mission Directorate is happy with us. We have other upcoming projects with Plone coming up. Some of them are internal, some of them are external. So that's where we are. So
any questions?
Do you guys work for NASA or for a contractor?
Most people that do developing at NASA are going to be contractors.
most engineers, anybody technical.
A lot of scientists, too,
Yeah.
are contractors. Because most NASA people, if you walk around the halls, they're almost all administrators and managers of a group of contractors that happen to like science.
Is that it? Oh, yes.
So it's good to see headquarters people not wearing suits.
Thank you.
Oh, they're such hippies. You should go to the third floor.
Yeah.
Have you guys considered using, I know there's certain NASA restrictions as far as creating like extranets or using the community aspect of Plone?
We are, oh, do you want to speak to this?
Yes, we actually have a couple of applications coming up. They're semi-internal. They're actually for internal people communicating with external people, but being able to share files. We're actually looking at doing that in Plone 3, and that's an upcoming project.
What he's mentioning is that NASA, because it is a federal agency, we are really constrained with social networking. We couldn't do Twitter.
Yes, we can.
Oh, we can.
We actually just got the okay. Does anybody follow the Mars Phoenix Twitter? Actually, a bunch of them started, it was grassroots. People started using Twitter and started using Facebook. And for a second, we thought NASA would come down and say, oh, we can't use that, we can't use that. And then they turned around and says, no, 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 everybody has to get one. So that's actually coming up in one of the
All the
releases.
missions now.
Yeah.
I think probably some of us heard about the Twitter as a news item when the machine announced that it found water or whatever, ice,
Mhm.
and it found ice. So that became like, that was on Boing and so on.
Yeah, and now LRO has one, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which is kind of creepy because LRO's end of life is crashing into the moon. So it's kind of weird to read about it, and it has a very human first-person perspective.
They all give a very first-person perspective to the missions.
Yeah, and but they're trying to get into like LinkedIn. They're pushing people to get into that. So they're really trying to push people into the social aspect, because you can find them on Facebook.
Yeah. The challenge, though, that I think you were bringing up is that security doesn't like that.
Security tends to, as long as you monitor, the only thing they care about is data getting out that they didn't want to get out. We can't give any PII information, personally identifiable information. We can't give out financial information. We can't give out infrastructure information. Like, for instance, we had our listing of what our architecture looked like. That's only a tenth of what we could show. That was what they said, okay, you can talk about this generic stuff.
The other thing that we have to be careful of is comments. Because the problem is, for example, on a site about evolution, maybe you'll get someone in the comments talking about intelligent design. And then all of a sudden people are saying, hey, they said on a NASA site something about intelligent design. Well, it was in the comments. It's what the mass media tends to do with blogs. When they read blog comments, they take that as the context of the main article. That's the classic case. And that's very understandably nerve-wracking for NASA or any federal agency.
Was security a kind of a relevant consideration when you were choosing, platforms and products?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Can you
Want to expand?
Can you elaborate on that slightly?
Security was a huge part of what we did. They wanted to make sure that, HTML, all they have to do is secure the server, and HTML is secure. You can't really do anything to it. Anything programmatic, the fact that there are ways to log in, there were ways to get into the system,
Cross-site scripting.
cross-site scripting, that had them very nervous. And because we got, security kind of ramped up during that time,
Right.
we got a whole new crew of people that were a whole lot more nervous. They really watched what we did. And they watched our server structure, and they watched, where things were and how you could log in and how you can, wait a minute, you mean you can edit the content on the web? What is wrong with you people? So we had to find a way to, make that more secure.
For us, one of the big selling points of security on Plone is CIA.gov, and that certainly helped get things awesome.
Now, they did like the fact that I said, if I make something private, nobody can get to you. I dare you to try to get to it. And they loved it. They loved it. You couldn't even tell that it might exist. It was just a 404. No permission denied. They liked that. They were more nervous about the logging in because it's a very European application out of the box. And the joke is that it starts off in public draft. And it's like, what do you mean it starts out public? What if somebody puts up something wrong? And they were all up in arms. So we had to change our workflow. So the first thing was it starts off private. That we are not a sharing kind of people. That does not go out until we're ready for it to go out.
Sounds like you go bipolar, Like you have to provide information on what's going on, but then...
Public affairs, baby. Everything, we're very fortunate that our customer does a lot of that work for us. She doesn't make us, go to PA. But for a lot of other sites, they have to have a special group of people actually look over everything you post and say, yes, this, is accurate and it's public and it doesn't make us look bad. And then you can hand it over.
Well, that's the funny thing with having the missions have a Twitter feed. I mean, who do you find? How do you pick that person that's going to be the persona of?
They often pick themselves.
Or something?
It's a very human factors. It's an interesting kind of human factors thing that they often pick themselves. There's somebody with a good voice. There's somebody that's a good writer that, has a BlackBerry with Twitterberry on it and wants to be able to post these things. So often, that's not as much of an issue. You find somebody that's enthusiastic. You give them the warning that, do not start talking about, infrastructure thing, PII. But all of us are trained in that. So we often know, but for those cases, it's like LRO, they had a person that had that voice, that was, enthusiastic and young and wanted to do it. So you find those people tend to, just rise up. It wasn't a case.
I mean, someone's got
Yes.
to approve that person.
Yes, those were all approved.
I think we probably have to go about now. If you do happen to see Chris Shenton or Rita Bryan, and you've got, or myself or Alex Skark, and you've got some technical questions, there are some limitations about what we can talk about, but by all means, especially, we love to chat.